Mr. Muddle by Roger Hargreaves. Poor Mr. Muddle just couldn't get anything right. Everything he did, everything he tried, everything he said was muddled. Totally, utterly, completely, absolutely muddled. Imagine, for instance, something as simple as hammering a nail into a wall. Now, what could get muddled with hammering a nail into a wall? Mr. Muddle could get it muddled, and frequently did. Imagine, for instance, something as simple as putting on your coat. Now, what could get muddled with putting on your coat? Well, see for yourself. Only Mr. Muddle would put on his coat like that. Imagine, for instance, something as simple as going out for a walk. And now, what could get muddled out going for a walk? Well, when your legs start walking one way and you start walking the other, that is a very muddled sort of walk. Poor Mr. Muddle, walking one way and going another. Now, you'd probably like to know where Mr. Muddle lives. In a house by the sea, near a place called SeaTac. Mr. Muddle's house was supposed to be in the middle of the country. And Mr. Muddle, who built the house himself, got the place all muddled up. Of course. And you can tell that Mr. Muddle had built his house himself, can't you? This story starts one afternoon when Mr. Muddle was having his breakfast. Yes, we know who don't have breakfast in the afternoon, but you do. You get your meal times muddled up. Mr. Muddle was having bread and butter and jam and a cup of tea with milk and sugar. He spread the butter on the table, and then spread the jam on the plate, and then poured the milk with the bread, and filled the cup with sugar, and then poured the tea on the bread. What a terribly muddled up breakfast. That afternoon, after breakfast, he went to walk into that beach near his house in order to warm up a appetite for supper. He met an old fisherman called George, who he knew quite well. "Good morning, Mr. Muddle," said George. "Good evening," replied Mr. Muddle. George smiled. "How would you like to come fishing with me?" he asked. "Oh, no, please," replied Mr. Muddle eagerly. "Help me push the boat out of the beach," called George. "Right-ho," said Mr. Muddle, and pulled the boat further out of the beach. "Oh, Mr. Muddle," said the Georgette, to show Mr. Muddle the difference between pulling and pushing. However, eventually, somehow or the other, they managed to get the boat at the sea. "Now, let's fish," said George, dropping a fish right out of the boat. "Right-ho," said Mr. Muddle, and dropped himself on the side of the boat. Splash. "Oh, Mr. Muddle," said George, "yeah." It was no good, but then it got any fish. And when I decided that boat came back, "Help me pull them out of the beach." "Come on, George." "Right-ho," said Mr. Muddle, and pushed the boat back in the water. George was just supposed to say, "Oh, Mr. Muddle," again, and he had an idea. He smiled to himself. "Help me push the right out of the sea," George called. "Right-ho," said Mr. Muddle, and pulled the boat up on the beach. "Well done, Mr. Muddle," said George. Mr. Muddle smiled a smile and went home. George smiled a smile and went to tell everybody. The following day in SeaTown, Mr. Brick, the builder, asked Mr. Muddle to hold his coat for him. "Right-ho," said Mr. Muddle, and held his ladder to right him, which is what Mr. Brick really wanted. "Well done, Mr. Muddle," smiled Brick, Mr. Brick, who'd been talking to George. Mr. Muddle's really pleased. Then Mrs. Scrub at the laundry asked Mr. Muddle to pass her the soap. Right ho, said Mr. Muddle, and passed her a clothes peg, which is what Miss Scrub really wanted. Well done, Mr. Muddle, smiled Mrs. Scrub, who had also been talking to George. Mr. Muddle was extremely pleased. And then Mr. Black, the coal man, asked Mr. Muddle to lift the sack of coal down his lorry. Right ho, said Mr. Muddle, and lift the sack full of the laundry, which is what Mr. Jack Black really wanted to lock. Yeah, well done, Mr. Muddle, smiled Mr. Black. George had talked to everybody. Mr. Muddle's delighted. In fact, Mr. Muddle was so delighted he decided to go home and cook himself a large meal to celebrate. Roast turkey and peas and potatoes and gravy. He put the turkey in the cupboard to cook. He peeled the peas. And he put the potatoes in the refrigerator to boil. And then do you know what he did? He tried to slice the gravy. Oh, Mr. Muddle. God. Okay, this is not a duck. It's just Mr. Muddle messing up this cool hat. And no boy that Baba Foop was cat. I'm almost Did Mr. Muddle get this car? Skirk. But you better get Mr. Noisy's line. Wait, what's that sound coming from? It's just some explosive. I'm back a piece of me. Oh no. Did she just make a terrible mess? I don't know. Maybe Mr. Muddle just actually explode money. We need to clean this up. Oh no! Dump to him!